Hi, my name is Olivia. I used to think family meant showing up when it mattered, until I realized I was the only one who believed that. It started at the family barbecue, the first gathering we'd had in 3 years. The kind of event where everyone pretends the silence between visits never happened, where conversations float on the surface like oil on water. I arrived early, helping my aunt set up tables in the backyard, arranging the plastic chairs in careful circles like we were planning some sacred ceremony instead of just another afternoon of forced pleasantries. The summer heat pressed down on everything: the wilting potato salad, the ice melting too fast in the coolers, my dress sticking to my back as I carried folding chairs from the garage. Everyone trickled in gradually, the usual suspects with their usual small talk. Uncle Mike with his golf stories. Cousin Jenny with her toddler who screamed every time someone looked at him wrong. The familiar dance of relatives who see each other just often enough to remember why they keep their distance. Then Amanda arrived. She pulled up in a car that gleamed like it had never seen a parking lot, never known the indignity of bird droppings or grocery store dings. The engine hummed expensive promises as she turned it off, and when she stepped out, she moved like someone who had practiced this moment in front of a mirror. Hair perfectly arranged despite the humidity, wearing white pants that would have terrified me. The kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about stains, about appearances, about what people might think if you weren't absolutely perfect. The conversations around the yard shifted, like flowers turning toward the sun. Suddenly, everyone had a reason to drift in her direction, drawn by the magnetic pull of obvious success. She hugged everyone with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for people you haven't wronged, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, complimenting haircuts that looked exactly the same as last time. I stayed by the drink cooler, fishing ice cubes out of lukewarm water, watching this performance unfold with the familiar ache of being invisible in plain sight. That's when she announced it. Not quietly, not in the modest way normal people share good news. Amanda's voice carried across the entire yard like she was addressing a press conference. I finally bought my dream home. She paused, letting the words settle, letting everyone turn to face her properly. 5 bedrooms, marble kitchen counters, walk-in closets bigger than most people's bedrooms. It's everything I've always wanted, all mine, just a reward for all my hard work. The applause came immediately, automatic, like someone had pressed a button. Aunt Martha actually wiped tears from her eyes, reaching out to squeeze Amanda's hand. "Oh, honey, I'm so proud of you. Your grandmother would have been thrilled to see this." Grandmother. The word hit me like cold water. Before we continue, drop a comment. Where are you watching this from and what time is it there? I'd love to know how far this story is reaching, especially if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. I stood there, invisible beside the melting ice, watching my family celebrate Amanda's success, while a truth sat heavy in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. They were all so eager to congratulate her, so ready to believe in her fairy tale, that none of them bothered to ask the questions that mattered. Like how exactly she'd managed to afford a house like that on her marketing coordinator salary. Like why she'd never mentioned looking at houses before. Like whose name was actually on the deed. But I knew the answers. I'd known them for months, had carried them around like secrets that burned, watching Amanda build her fantasy one social media post at a time while I stayed silent in the shadows of truth. The thing about family gatherings is how they make you remember all the times you were forgotten. As I watched everyone fawn over Amanda's announcement, I remembered another gathering, 2 years earlier, when Grandma had started forgetting names, but still remembered faces. Amanda had shown up that day 2, 20 minutes late, stayed just long enough to take a selfie with Grandma for Instagram, then left because she had plans. I remembered the caption she'd posted later. "Love my strong Nana, your family time down and blessed." She'd even spelled Grandma's name wrong, wrote Nana instead of Nana, the way Grandma had always insisted we say it. Such a small thing, but it felt like proof of how little attention she'd ever paid, how surface level her affection had always been. While Amanda was building her online image as the devoted granddaughter, I was the one sitting in sterile hospital waiting rooms, holding Grandma's hand through endless doctor appointments. I was the one who moved her into the assisted living facility when her arthritis got too bad for the stairs in her old house. I was the one who visited 3 times a week, bringing her favorite cookies and listening to the same stories over and over as her memory played tricks on her. I was the one who was there when she died. Amanda posted a tribute on Facebook the next day, a throwback photo from some Christmas 5 years earlier, with a caption about how Grandma had taught her everything about strength and grace. 47 likes, and 12 crying face emojis from relatives who probably couldn't remember the last time they'd called Grandma just to check in. But here's what Amanda's tribute didn't mention. Grandma had been asking for her those last few weeks. Not constantly, not dramatically, but in the quiet way elderly people ask for things when they sense time running short. "Has Amanda been by?" she'd ask. And I'd make excuses, say she was busy with work, promise she'd visit soon. Grandma would nod and change the subject, but I could see the disappointment she was too polite to voice. The funeral was small. Amanda gave a beautiful eulogy about cherished memories and lasting impact, speaking to a room full of people who knew exactly how often she'd actually visited. She wore black designer clothes and cried appropriately, and everyone commented afterward on how well she was handling everything. I sat in the front row, wearing a dress I'd bought at Target the day before, listening to Amanda talk about a relationship that existed more in her Instagram feed than in reality. When it was over, people hugged her first, told her how sorry they were, how proud Grandma would have been of the woman she'd become. I got polite nods and generic condolences. "She's in a better place now," they said, patting my shoulder briefly, before moving on to more interesting conversations. That was 4 months ago. Now here she was, standing in my aunt's backyard, claiming Grandma's house as her reward for hard work, and everyone was applauding like she deserved a medal for basic human achievement. The conversation moved on eventually, the way conversations do at family gatherings. Someone brought up Cousin Tommy's new job, Aunt Sarah's cruise plans, the usual carousel of updates that let everyone feel caught up without actually connecting. But Amanda's announcement hung in the air like perfume, making everything else seem smaller and less important. I helped clean up when the party wound down, loading paper plates into garbage bags, folding chairs that had held the weight of all our comfortable lies. Amanda had left early, claiming she had to meet friends for dinner. Probably true, probably somewhere expensive, probably paid for with money that should have told a different story. As I carried the last of the folding chairs to the garage, Aunt Martha caught my arm. "Isn't it wonderful about Amanda's house?" she said, and her smile was so genuine it almost broke my heart. "Your grandmother always said that girl would make something of herself." I nodded, managed some appropriate response, something about being happy for her. But inside, I was thinking about Grandma's real words, the ones she'd spoken to me during one of our last lucid conversations, when the cancer was winning but her mind was still sharp enough to cut through pretense. "They'll all want the house when I'm gone," she'd said, staring out the window of her assisted living room toward the parking lot where my beat-up Honda sat next to visitors' BMWs and Mercedes. "They'll show up with their lawyers and their expectations, acting like they earned something they never worked for." She'd turned to look at me then, her eyes still fierce despite everything the illness was stealing from her. But it should go to the one who stayed. I'd tried to change the subject, uncomfortable with the weight of her words, but Grandma had reached over and taken my hand, with fingers that felt like paper and bones. "Promise me you'll read everything carefully," she'd said. "Don't let them rush you through the paperwork. Don't let them make you feel guilty for what's rightfully yours." I'd promised, not really understanding what she meant, thinking it was just another one of her worries about being a burden, her constant apologies for needing help with things that had once been simple. It wasn't until after the funeral, sitting in her lawyer's office with Amanda and Uncle Mike, that I understood what she'd been preparing me for. The lawyer had been kind, but efficient, the way professionals are when they're delivering news that will change everything. He'd read through the basic provisions first: small gifts to various relatives, donations to her church, her jewelry divided among the granddaughters, standard stuff that everyone nodded along with, checking mental boxes. Then he'd cleared, his throat in the way that signals something important coming. "Regarding the primary residence," he'd said, and I could feel the attention in the room shift, becoming sharp and focused. Amanda had straightened in her chair. Uncle Mike had leaned forward. Even I had found myself holding my breath. "The property located at 847 Maple Street is to be transferred upon death to my granddaughter Olivia Marie Henderson, who served as my primary caretaker during my final years, as recognized in the attached affidavit." The silence that followed was the kind that swallows sound, that makes you aware of heartbeats and the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant traffic outside windows that suddenly seemed very far away. Amanda had been the first to speak. "I'm sorry. What? There must be some mistake." But there wasn't a mistake. Grandma had planned this carefully, deliberately. The affidavit was signed and witnessed, dated just 6 months earlier during one of her good days. It detailed the care I'd provided, the daily visits, the medical appointments, the grocery runs, the late-night phone calls when she couldn't sleep and needed someone to talk to. It was all there in legal language, but underneath the formal words was something much simpler. Love recognized, sacrifice acknowledged, presence valued over promises. Amanda had left the lawyer's office without saying goodbye, her heels clicking sharp anger against the marble floor. Uncle Mike had muttered something about unusual circumstances and family discussions, but he'd shaken my hand politely enough before following her out. I'd sat there for an extra 10 minutes, staring at papers that had just changed my life, trying to process what had happened. The lawyer had been patient, explaining next steps, transfer procedures, timelines, professional and thorough, treating me like someone who deserved to understand their inheritance, instead of someone who'd gotten lucky. But I hadn't felt lucky. I'd felt overwhelmed, uncertain, guilty for having something I'd never asked for. Grateful too, but the gratitude was complicated, mixed up with grief and the weird responsibility that comes with being chosen. That was 4 months ago. 4 months of watching Amanda post about her new place on social media. 4 months of family members congratulating her on her success. 4 months of staying quiet while lies built themselves into truth through repetition. The hardest part wasn't the lying itself. It was watching how easily everyone believed it. How ready they were to accept Amanda's version of events without asking questions, without wondering about details that didn't quite add up. She'd moved into Grandma's house just 2 weeks after the funeral, before the estate had even been fully processed, based on nothing more than Uncle Mike's assumption that she'd inherit it. She'd started renovations immediately. New paint, new fixtures, new everything that could erase the traces of the woman who'd actually lived there. I drove by once, early on, and saw contractors hauling out Grandma's old furniture, her carefully tended garden being torn up for better landscaping. It felt like watching someone erase a person's entire existence, one dumpster load at a time. The social media posts had started that same week. Home, sweet home. Blessed by new beginnings. Dreams come true. Photos of paint swatches and tile samples. Stage shots of Amanda holding coffee mugs in what used to be Grandma's kitchen. Carefully angled selfies that showed off the improvements, while cropping out anything that might have looked familiar to relatives who remembered the house the way it used to be. Everyone ate it up. Comments poured in from family members and friends, congratulating her on her beautiful new home, asking for decorating tips, sharing heart-eye emojis under photos of renovations that were being paid for with money that didn't belong to her. Watched it all from my small apartment across town, the place I'd moved to after Grandma died because staying in my old neighborhood felt too complicated, too full of memories I wasn't ready to process. My apartment was nothing special. 2 bedrooms, cheap carpet, a kitchen window that looked out onto a parking lot, instead of the garden Grandma had spent 30 years perfecting. But it was mine. Honestly mine, paid for with money I'd earned, at jobs that didn't define my worth. While Amanda was posting Instagram stories about marble countertops and walk-in closets, I was working double shifts at the medical clinic where I'd been a receptionist for 3 years, picking up extra hours, doing bookkeeping for a small accounting firm on weekends. Nothing glamorous, nothing Instagram-worthy, but honest work that let me sleep at night without wondering whose sacrifice had paid for my comfort. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting. Watching my family celebrate Amanda's success, while I carried the weight of truth like a stone in my chest. Part of me wanted to speak up immediately, to share the lawyer's letter and watch their faces change as reality rewrote their assumptions. But another part of me, the part that had spent years being overlooked, dismissed, treated like background noise in my own family, wanted something different. I wanted Amanda to feel what it was like to build something on false ground. I wanted her to invest herself fully in a lie before discovering it couldn't hold her weight. Maybe that makes me petty. Maybe it makes me cruel. But grief does strange things to your sense of justice. When you've spent months watching someone perform love they never actually felt, watching them profit from sacrifice they never made, petty starts to feel like the only power you have left. So I stayed quiet. I let her dig deeper into her fantasy. Let her announce her good fortune at family gatherings. Let her accept congratulations she didn't deserve. I watched her schedule a housewarming party for the extended family, planning to show off renovations, paid for with imaginary money, and I said nothing. But I wasn't idle during those months. I was preparing. I contacted Grandma's lawyer, confirmed that the will was airtight, that the property transfer was legally sound. I had the affidavit notarized again, just to be certain. I researched property law, talked to a real estate attorney about the best way to handle someone who'd moved into a house they didn't own. I gathered documentation, organized paperwork, built a case that couldn't be argued with or explained away. The lawyer was sympathetic but practical. Technically, she's trespassing, he explained during one of our meetings. But given that she's family and seems to have moved in based on a misunderstanding rather than malicious intent, the courts would probably prefer a civil resolution. A certified letter explaining the situation, followed by a reasonable timeline for her to vacate, should be sufficient. Civil resolution, reasonable timeline. Legal language that made it all sound so clean and professional, so different from the messy reality of family betrayal and inherited guilt. But I understood what he meant. This didn't have to be ugly. Amanda had made an honest mistake, sort of. She'd assumed she'd inherit the house, moved in based on that assumption, and started spending money she didn't have on renovations she couldn't afford. When faced with legal documentation proving her error, she'd surely see reason, apologize for the misunderstanding, and quietly move out. That's what I told myself anyway. That's the version of events I held on to during those long months of watching her build castles in the air. The housewarming party was scheduled for a Saturday in September, right after the major renovations were finished. Amanda had sent out formal invitations, actual paper invitations, printed and mailed, the kind of thing people do when they want to make sure everyone knows how important the occasion is. "Join us for a celebration of new beginnings," the invitation read, with a photo of the house's new front door, painted a shade of blue that Grandma would have hated. I RSVP'd, yes, of course. How could I miss it? But the Wednesday before the party, I made a different kind of RSVP. I sent the certified letter. The lawyer had helped me draft it, keeping the language formal but clear, avoiding anything that might sound accusatory or emotional. Just facts: the will, the inheritance, the legal ownership, and a request that she vacate the property within 30 days to avoid further legal complications. I included copies of everything: the will, the affidavit, the property transfer documents, the lawyer's contact information for verification, everything she'd need to understand that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a family dispute, but a legal reality that couldn't be negotiated away with tears or excuses. The letter was delivered Thursday morning. I know because I tracked the package. Watched the delivery confirmation ping on my phone while I was at work, updating patient files and answering phone calls like it was any other day. But inside, I was counting hours, imagining Amanda's reaction, wondering how long it would take for the truth to fully sink in. She didn't call that day, or the next. The silence was almost worse than confrontation would have been. No angry voicemails, no text messages demanding explanations, no family members calling to mediate. Just silence, stretching through Thursday evening, Friday morning, Friday afternoon. I started to wonder if she'd even received the letter, if maybe she was out of town or the delivery had been delayed. But the tracking information was clear. Delivered, signed for, confirmed. The silence meant she was processing, planning, deciding how to handle a situation that couldn't be handled with charm or connections or carefully curated social media posts. Friday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Martha. Looking forward to Amanda's party tomorrow. She's worked so hard on that house. The cognitive dissonance was stunning. Either Amanda hadn't told anyone about the letter, or the family was so invested in their version of events that they were choosing to ignore inconvenient truths. Either way, it meant Saturday's party was still happening, which meant I'd be walking into a room full of people celebrating a lie while carrying the weight of truth in my purse. I almost didn't go. Almost sent my regrets and let Amanda figure out how to explain the situation to a house full of guests. But something about that felt cowardly, like I was choosing the easy path instead of the right one. Grandma had chosen me to inherit her house because I was the one who stayed. The one who showed up when it mattered. The least I could do was show up one more time. The party was exactly what I'd expected. Amanda had outdone herself with the decorations, the catered food, the careful staging of every room to show off the renovations. Family members wandered through the house with drinks in their hands, commenting on the beautiful changes, asking Amanda about her design choices, treating her like some kind of home improvement celebrity. I arrived fashionably late, carrying a small gift bag with a bottle of wine I'd never intended for her to actually drink. The house looked different. Not just the obvious changes like paint and fixtures, but something deeper. It felt sterile, impersonal, like a showroom instead of a home. All traces of Grandma's personality had been erased, replaced with Pinterest-perfect neutrals that could have belonged to anyone. Olivia! Amanda's voice carried across the living room, bright and artificial as party streamers. She made her way over with the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that says we need to talk but not here, not now. I'm so glad. You could make it, she said, accepting the wine with hands that trembled just slightly. It means a lot to have family here. Family. The word felt heavy between us, loaded with everything we weren't saying. Beautiful renovations, I said, looking around at walls that used to hold Grandma's family photos, at floors where her favorite rug used to lie. Very different from how I remember it. Amanda's smile flickered. Yes, well, I wanted to make it my own, you know? Fresh start and all that. We stood there in uncomfortable politeness while the party swirled around us, both of us knowing we were performing for an audience that had no idea what was really happening. Uncle Mike raised his beer in our direction, grinning like he was proud of how well his nieces were getting along. Aunt Martha snapped photos of us standing together, probably planning to post them later with captions about family love and support. If only they knew. The evening wore on with the strange surreal quality of dreams where everything looks normal but feels wrong. People complimented Amanda on her beautiful home, asked about her mortgage rates and decorating budgets, shared their own house hunting stories like she was a member of some exclusive club they all wanted to join. I made appropriate small talk, admired the renovations I could see, avoided the rooms where Grandma's presence had been strongest. But I was watching Amanda the whole time, studying her face for cracks in the performance, waiting for the moment when the weight of truth would become too heavy to carry gracefully. It came during the house tour. Amanda had gathered everyone, In the living room, wine and excitement making people louder and more enthusiastic than usual. She started with the kitchen, pointing out the marble countertops and stainless steel appliances, explaining her design choices with the confidence of someone who'd convinced herself she deserved every expensive detail. The previous owner had such outdated taste, she said, leading the group toward the bedrooms. Everything was so old-fashioned, so stuck in the past. I really wanted to bring this place into the modern era. The previous owner. Like Grandma was some stranger who'd happened to live here before, instead of the woman who'd raised half the D. People in this room, who'd hosted every major family celebration for 30 years, who'd died just 4 months ago surrounded by memories Amanda had thrown away like garbage. That's when I spoke up. The previous owner was our grandmother, I said quietly, but somehow my voice carried over the party chatter. This was Grandma's house. The tour stopped. Conversations faltered. Someone's wine glass clinked against a side table as they set it down too quickly. Of course, Amanda said, her voice steady but her smile slipping. I just meant... You meant that you've erased every trace of her to make room for your own taste. I continued, still quiet, still calm, but with something in my tone that made people pay attention. Her garden, her furniture, her photos, all gone. The room was getting uncomfortable now. Family members were looking between us with the expression people get when they sense drama coming but don't know how to escape it. Uncle Mike cleared his throat like he was about to interrupt, redirect the conversation back to safer territory. But I wasn't finished. It's amazing how much you've accomplished here, I said, looking directly at Amanda. Especially considering you don't actually own this house. The silence that followed was complete. Not just quiet, silent in the way that happens when every single person in a room stops breathing at exactly the same moment. Amanda's face went through several expressions very quickly. Confusion, denial, anger, fear. I don't know what you're trying to say, Olivia, but I'm saying that Grandma left this house to me, I said, and my voice was steady now, clear and certain. Not to you. To me. It's been legally mine since the day she died. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder I'd been carrying around for months. The will, the affidavit, the property transfer documents, all the papers Amanda should have. Read before moving in. Before spending money she didn't have on renovations she had no right to make. I sent you the documentation on Wednesday, I continued, setting the folder on the coffee table where everyone could see it. Certified mail, return receipt requested. I'm sure you received it. Amanda stared at the folder like it might explode. Around us, family members were starting to whisper, to piece together what was happening, to realize that the party they'd come to celebrate was built on a foundation that was crumbling in real time. This is ridiculous, Amanda said, but her voice was weak now, defensive. Uncle Mike said. Uncle Mike assumed, I interrupted. He never read the will. None of you did. You just assumed that because Amanda was the successful one, the one with the good job and the nice car, she'd be the one to inherit property. But Grandma didn't make decisions based on assumptions. She made them based on who actually showed up. The truth hung in the air like smoke, making everything else seem small and far away. I could see understanding dawning on faces around the room. Family members remembering who had actually visited Grandma, who had taken her to doctor's appointments, who had been there during the long decline that Amanda had documented on social media, but never actually witnessed. How long have you known? Aunt Martha asked quietly. Since the reading of the will, I said. 4 months. And you said nothing? Uncle Mike's voice was getting louder, angry in the way people get when they realize they've been made to look foolish. You let her renovate the house, plan this party, invest all this money. I let her live in a fantasy, I said. The same way all of you have been letting her live in a fantasy. Pretending she was the devoted granddaughter, pretending she earned something she never worked for, pretending that Instagram posts are the same thing as actual presents. The room was dividing now, I could feel it. Some people were looking at Amanda with new understanding, seeing the situation for what it really was. Others were looking at me like I was the villain, like I'd orchestrated some cruel joke instead of simply allowing the truth to reveal itself. Amanda sat down heavily on the couch, her perfect party dress crumpling around her. For the first time, all evening she looked genuine, not performed, not curated, just genuinely shocked and lost. "I didn't know," she said, and her voice was small now, nothing like the confident hostess who'd been giving tours 5 minutes earlier. "I really didn't know." And looking at her face, I believed her. She really hadn't known, hadn't read the will carefully, hadn't bothered to verify the legal details before making life-changing decisions. She'd operated on assumptions and expectations, the way people do when they've never had to question whether they deserve the good things that come their way. But not knowing didn't change the facts. Didn't change the months of renovations paid for with money she didn't have, the party celebrating success she hadn't achieved, the social media posts claiming ownership of something that had never been hers. "What happens now?" she asked, and she sounded younger suddenly, like the little girl I remembered from childhood summers, before life taught us to perform for each other instead of just being family. "Now you move out," I said, not unkindly but without room for negotiation. "You have 30 days, as outlined in the letter. If you need help with the logistics, I'm willing to discuss reasonable arrangements." The party ended quickly after that. People made polite excuses, thanked Amanda for her hospitality with the awkward courtesy reserved for situations no one knows how to handle. Within an hour, the house was empty except for Amanda and me, sitting in her beautifully renovated living room surrounded by the remnants of a celebration that had turned into something else entirely. "I really loved her, you know," Amanda said, into the silence. "Grandma, I know it didn't look like it, but I did." "I know," I said, and I meant it. Love and presence aren't the same thing, but they're not mutually exclusive either. Amanda had loved Grandma in her own way, from her own distance, with her own limitations. That didn't make her evil, just human. "I can't afford to pay you back for the renovations," she said, staring at her hands. "I used credit cards, took out a personal loan. I thought I'd have time to figure out the finances once I owned the house." "I'm not asking you to pay me back," I said. "The renovations will stay with the house. Consider them your contribution to Grandma's legacy." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it wasn't cruelty either. Just the practical recognition that some mistakes are too expensive to fix, too complicated to untangle completely. Amanda moved out 2 weeks later, quietly and without fanfare. No social media updates about the transition, no explanations too. Friends who'd been following her home renovation journey. The family group chat went silent for a while, everyone processing what had happened, what it meant about the stories we tell ourselves and each other. I moved into Grandma's house a month later, after Amanda had cleared out her personal belongings and left the keys on the kitchen counter. Walking through those rooms again felt like stepping back in time, but also like stepping forward into something new. The renovations Amanda had made were beautiful, objectively speaking. Professional and modern, and exactly the kind of thing that would photograph well for real estate listings. But I've been slowly adding back pieces of Grandma, her favorite reading chair in the living room, her china cabinet in the dining room, photos from family gatherings when we still knew how to be happy together without performing happiness for cameras. The garden is growing back too. I planted new flowers where Amanda's landscapers had torn out Grandma's perennials, choosing varieties I remember from childhood visits. It will take time to establish, to become the kind of garden that looks effortless and abundant, but I'm not in a hurry. Some evenings, when the light is soft and the kettle is whistling in the kitchen, I talk to Grandma the way I used to during those last months. I tell her about my day, about the small improvements I'm making to her house, about the way the evening light still hits the kitchen window at exactly the right angle to make everything look golden. I don't talk to Amanda much anymore. She sends Christmas cards and birthday wishes, the kind of polite contact that acknowledges relationship without requiring real connection. I heard through family gossip that she moved back in with her parents for a while, that she's slowly paying off the debt from renovations that were never hers to make. The family has mostly moved on, the way families do when uncomfortable truths get too heavy to keep discussing. We still have gatherings, still make small talk and share updates about jobs and relationships and the normal progression of life. But something has shifted. Some understanding about the difference between presence and performance, between earning something and simply expecting it. I think Grandma would be pleased with how it all turned out. Not the drama or the hurt feelings, but the final result. The house staying with someone who understood its value, who'd loved not just the idea of having it, but the reality of caring for it and the person who'd lived there. They deleted Amanda's housewarming photos from the family group chat, but not the memories of who really showed up when it mattered most.